Good afternoon. Well, I'm going to attempt in the next half an hour or so, I think that's what I've been given, to answer the most dangerous question within hearing care at this moment in time, and possibly ever, which is, will hearing technology ever remove the need for the hearing care professional? It is a question that is charged both emotionally and psychologically, and I would imagine lurks in the minds of most of us in this room for one reason or another. So, I've decided that since this is already a dangerous question, I should try and up the ante a little bit, and I should attempt to answer this at the inaugural conference of BIHIMA, which represents some of the world's leading innovators in hearing technology, for an audience of hearing care professionals, which means that I'll be walking a very fine line. There's a very good chance that I'm going to misstep somewhere and fall into deep waters with one party or another. It's also going to require tremendous balance, so I'll see what you think at the end of this. But if that wasn't dangerous enough, I'm also going to, I've just realized I can see my slides down there. That's very helpful. I was getting neck ache. Right. I'm also going to be, obviously to answer this question, predicting the future to some extent. And we know from history that history is littered with the fallacies of false prophets. So again, another big risk there. And finally, it's a complex subject, and there's absolutely no way that I can cover all the things that lock in together with this. So a bit like Harry Houdini trapped in the water, I have a limited time to cover it, and there's a good chance that I might not get out of any mess I get myself into at the beginning. All right, so let me set the scene for you by introducing you to a young man called George. Now, George is a junior clerk at a savings bank in America. And when he's 23, he decides to take a vacation. And one of his colleagues says, well, why don't you take a camera with you? You can tell straight away that this was in the days before smartphones. So George thinks this is a great idea. And he goes out and he buys himself an expensive camera, gets all the kit that goes with it, and realizes he knows very little about taking a photograph. And so he books himself onto a training course. Well, soon, he's ready to take his first photograph. In order to do so, one of the things he does is he takes a sheet of glass. I'll come out here now because I want to describe something. He takes a sheet of glass about so big. He files down the edges so he doesn't cut himself. He then polishes this piece of glass so it's smooth and free from blemish. He then takes a bottle of liquid called collodion. Now, collodion is made from cotton wool. It's made from ether and alcohol, and he pours it into the center of this sheet of glass and begins rocking it back and forth so the collodion covers the whole of this plate of glass. And he keeps going until the collodion has set but hasn't dried out completely. He then takes this sheet of glass, he goes into a darkened room, and he immerses it into a bath of another liquid, this time silver nitrate. Now, silver nitrate reacts with light. And so by bonding the silver nitrate to the collodion's made it sticky, the plate becomes light sensitive. He then puts this plate into a plate holder, and the plate holder seals out any light, but it has a sliding panel on it. Are you trying to keep track of how many steps are involved in this? A sliding panel. So then he can expose this plate of glass to the light when he's ready. He then goes out to his camera that he's already mounted on a tripod. This camera is the size of a microwave oven. He needs a pack horse to carry it around with him. It's already set on his subject, which can't move for very long, can't move very quickly. He then puts the plate holder into the back of the camera. He removes the sliding panel. He then takes off the lens cap from the camera, and after just the right amount of time, exposure time, he then puts the lens cap back on, puts the sliding panel back into the holder, and then takes out the plate holder back into the dark room, and then he then goes and develops it. Now, to develop it, he takes the plate out. He then, let me try and remember this now. He then immerses it into he pours some liquid, some developer fluid over it, rocks it back and forth until an image appears. He then rinses it off with distilled water. He then puts it into another bath, which is a fixative. Once he takes it out of there, he leaves it in there for about 2 to 3 minutes, I think, takes it out, then he rinses it under running water for 20 minutes. He then takes it out, lets it dry, and then he warms it very gently over a flame. Once it's warm, he then takes it away from the flame, pours a varnish over it, rocks it back and forth until it covers it, puts it back onto the flame to seal the varnish, takes it off, and then leaves it in a drying rack for 24 hours, and it's only then that he can tell whether the photograph he took the day before was any good. And so it is every time George wants to take a photograph. Well, George he was a bit obsessive, he was a bit obsessive, and he never ended up taking that vacation. In fact, he never really got much into taking photographs either. But 10 years later, he published this advert in a local newspaper. The Kodak camera. You press the button, we do the rest. Now, the reason I spent that time describing the wet collodion process to you is because in the 21st century, it's very easy for us when we have our smartphones and things where we can just bombard each other with selfies, and we can just take any moment that we come across. It's hard for us to imagine what it was like taking a photograph when it all first started. And the idea that we have, looking back, is that's very old-fashioned. That's what we see, isn't it? George felt the same way. He was frustrated by the process, so he condensed the entire process into a single press of a button. He also brought it into a portable device so that anybody could take it out with them on the field, and he made it affordable. And he forever changed the way that we think of photography. Now, when we look at that then, we have then and we have now. Quite a contrast. We still have professional photographers today. But if we look back at the photographers of the day who were professional, there were no non-professional photographers. It was all professional or very serious amateurs like George. Now, the thing is that they had the latest technology. It wasn't that they were behind. They were at the cutting edge of the game, these photographers. They also were incredibly professional. They adhered to best practice. If they didn't adhere to best practice, the picture wouldn't have come out. But many of them, when they saw this, it changed everything. A lot of their training, a lot of their experience, a lot of their expertise were rendered null and void. And many of the professionals at the time thought that their profession was under threat. Now, here is where we learn our first lesson. That any profession that defines itself by a product or, like these photographers did, a process, will always feel the threat of obsolescence. Because any time that process becomes replaced by something that's better, then there's always a threat if you are defining yourself by that process. But there were other photographers at the time who defined themselves differently. They thought this was great because who wants to, if they define themselves by capturing a moment in time, which ultimately, if you compare photography to portrait painting, for example, it was a big step forward. And that's how they saw what they were doing. Then they saw this camera as offering new opportunities for them. The new technology with a new process offered them new opportunities. And so any profession that defines itself by a timeless purpose or need, so something that will stand the test of time, and then uses the advancing products and processes and services to fulfill that purpose and need, they stand more chance of standing the test of time. All right. So that sets the scene, and we'll return to George a little bit later on. Now, there are three rules, three drivers that drive the evolution of all products and processes, and you could say services as well. And the questions that we need to ask ourselves of every product, every process, every service is, can it be commoditized? Because anything that can be commoditized will be commoditized. We cannot fight it. It's one of those forces that happen in the world. And one of the things that commoditization does is it reduces the need for wealth. So in other words, you no longer have to be rich to own a computer. You no longer have to be rich to own an iPhone. Oh, scrap that. You no longer have to be rich to own a car. It makes it available to the masses. The second question to ask is, can it be digitized? Because anything that can be digitized will be digitized. And the impact of that is that it reduces the need for a distributor, because now you can have a direct relationship with the consumer. And finally, we have to ask ourselves, can it be despecialized? In other words, can it be taken out of the hands of experts or specialists or professionals and put into the hands of non-experts? Because that's what despecialization does. Okay, now these are things that we cannot change. They are forces in the world. Every profession, every industry faces these three things. But it is actually considered to be a good thing. It is what we consider to be progress. It makes things faster, cheaper, and better, which makes them more affordable and more widely available. And it's the reason we can walk into a supermarket and find the shelves stocked with what we need for our ingredients for that evening's meal. It's why we can have a smartphone in our pocket that is more powerful than the computer that landed people on the moon. It is the reason we can get medicine when we're sick and buy a paracetamol for less than £1. It is the reason we can all drive cars. The problem comes not from the fact that products and processes are subject to these things. It's when a profession or a professional links their own fate to those products and processes. Because as those drivers force them towards obsolescence, it can also drag the profession or the professional with it if they are defining themselves by those products or services that then become replaced. So the thing that we can learn from this is that if we want to avoid becoming obsolete, and this goes not just for hearing care professionals, it goes for any profession, any industry. It also goes for manufacturers as well. The first thing is never tie your own fate to the fate of a product or a process, because they will always be superseded through commoditization, digitization, and despecialization. Now, we have kind of feared these things, I believe, in our profession, and we're not the only ones. It happens in every other profession, every other industry. But as soon as we realize that these are forces that we can't stop, it's much easier for us to accept it and say, how can we use that to our advantage and our benefit? And the way that we do this is we have to understand, when will something become superseded? And the clue is in this word here. Because another term for obsolete is something that has served its purpose. So in order to know when something will become obsolete, we have to first understand what the purpose is and how long until something does a better job of fulfilling that purpose. So the second thing that we can do to avoid becoming obsolete is we need to choose a purpose that will always be needed, and then there's less risk of us becoming obsolete. And the third thing is then we can then have this freedom, and we can feel more relaxed about using the evolution of products and services as new opportunities, like those photographers did with the Kodak camera, to better serve that purpose. We still have professional photographers today, even though all of us take thousands, or is that just my mother-in-law, thousands of photographs and send them through WhatsApp. So, is there any way that we can work out how long it will be before something serves its purpose? Because surely this is a key question to answer in order to know whether hearing technology will replace the need for a hearing care professional. Okay, what we have to first do, of course, is know the purpose. He's my prophet. Okay, so if we take these three things here, at the bottom you'll see a boarding pass for air travel. Second one up, a plane representing air travel, and above that, a holiday destination. So just try and think, what is the purpose of each of those things, and how long before it served its purpose? So if we take the boarding pass, how long before it served its purpose? Well, we can take it at a very shallow level and say, well, it served its purpose once we've boarded the plane, all right? So then it's got a very, very short life. But having said that, we can also ask the same question in a much wider context and say, how long before boarding passes are no longer needed? And we know there, we have to ask, well, what is actually the purpose, and can something perform that purpose better? And we already know that there are apps now, which are much more convenient if you've ever used them, which gives us a QR code, we can download it to our phone, and that becomes our boarding pass. Now imagine if you were the manufacturer of boarding passes, the actual boarding card itself. You would feel very much under threat now, wouldn't you? But imagine instead that you owned the experience and you owned the technology that also governs the way that it read QR codes. Now, your purpose is bigger, it's more experiential, and therefore you're going to last a little bit longer. Okay, let's go up to air travel. So how long will air travel be before it gets superseded? Well, again, ask yourself, what is the purpose? The purpose really, as I would see it, is essentially to get somebody from A to B, and possibly in as short a time as possible, and you could say the easiest possible journey, obviously within the constraints and the resources that somebody has available. Now, that's not going to be superseded for quite some time, I would imagine, until, of course, we get Star Trek teleportation, which will make life a lot easier, especially if we do home visits, although it could be quite scary. You'd have to turn up outside the door, not in their bathroom. Okay, so here's another thing that we can learn from this, that when something stays around for quite some time, then you get other competitors into the area, other players, and they will all be looking to optimize that particular process, that particular purpose. And so you get commoditization in it. And when all things are equal and you can't differentiate between things, like for example soap, like for example aspirins and things, then cost becomes one of the deciding factors. So what now about a holiday destination? How long will that last? Will there always be a need for people to take holidays? What are the thoughts on this? I mean, I'm kind of biased on this. Okay, I would say it's going to pretty much last forever, or at least until maybe we change as human beings. And so this is the interesting thing, that when we look at this, we actually have a hierarchy, because the need for a boarding card depends on the need for air travel. The need for air travel depends on people needing to get to somewhere different. So whether it's a business trip or whether it's a holiday. So the safest place to be if we want to avoid obsolescence is right at the top of that hierarchy. So we can think of this hierarchy as at the bottom, at one end of the spectrum, we've got very specific, very time-limited needs, just like the boarding card. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got timeless human needs, things that will always be needed, or purposes that will always be there for human beings. So where do we draw our inspiration for these timeless human needs? Some of you will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, there's lots of debate and things as to whether this is the best way to represent human needs, but we haven't got time for that. But what I would say is the categories there I actually find very helpful for looking at these things. If we start at the bottom, physiological needs, we're talking about staying alive. We're talking about eating, we're talking about drinking, we're talking about getting enough sleep, all of those things that keep our body going. Safety is obviously avoidance of danger and threats to ourselves. Love and belonging, it's the need to connect to other people, it's the need to feel part of something. Esteem is the need to be respected, to be part of the bigger picture, to know that you matter and that your life isn't in vain. And then self-actualization is to become something better, to fulfill your potential. And then self-transcendence is turning your needs out, so thinking about needs outside of yourself, where you're serving a higher purpose. It might be religious, it might be a social purpose, it might be something else. But you'll notice there that when we think about it, we find that hearing plays a role in all of those human needs. So actually, there's a bit of a hint there as to help us to answer that question that we posed at the beginning. Now, coming back to our timeless human needs, we could look at these products and these processes and these services and categorize them in 3 different ways. I'm sure there are other ways, but I find this quite helpful. The first thing is that the boarding card serves a particular function. It simply gets you onto the plane. So we could call that functional. A knife and fork would be functional. It simply serves a very specific function or a purpose. Air travel involves more than just a function. There's an experience that's going on there. There's an interplay of all the different elements. And at the top, we have aspirational. It's that need to relax, that need to spend time with family. There's an aspiration there. The way to think of these things when we're categorizing products and processes is aspirational is where do I want to be? We could think of that as the destination, very much like travel. When it comes to the experiential, we're thinking, how do I want to get there? What's the manner? Do I want to get there in comfort? Do I want to get there quickly? Do I want to get there the scenic route? And so we can think of that as the journey. And then functional would be, what do I actually need in order to get there? And then we're thinking really of the resources that are involved. So, how does hearing care fit in with this? Where does it sit? Would you say it's functional? Would you say it's experiential? Would you say it's aspirational? It all depends on how we define hearing care and the purpose of hearing care. Now, traditionally, and we've touched on some of this today, traditionally, we've always focused on this idea that there are estimated to be, at this moment in time, around 11 million people across the UK. I don't have the figures for Ireland. I'm sorry, I tried to work it out, but I don't know how correct I was. Across the UK with a reduction in their hearing range. And then we talk about those people who don't use hearing technology out of that. And I actually corrected this figure based on the latest Eurotrack studies. I'm using the 11 million based on if you measure it audiometrically rather than self-reported. When you add all of that up together, I work it out to be about 8 million people still in the UK who do not use hearing technology but have some form of reduced hearing level. That might be wrong, it might be right, but it gives us a rough idea. It's roughly the population of London, by the way. Okay, so when we think about that, then it's obvious for somebody to come along to say, well, if hearing loss really is a serious problem, and we've been looking about that today, then surely we need to make hearing technology more affordable and more widely available because we have to get it to those 8 million people. So we could say that the purpose of hearing care there is to address untreated hearing loss by getting hearing technology onto more people. And that has been one of the motivations that has been in our profession and our industry for decades. It might not be the only one, but it has been quite a strong factor. Now, if we take those two things there, let's just see what happens. If we take more affordable and more widely available, which does make sense, it's why we all have smartphones in our pockets, and we look at it there, we're talking about something that's functional. Because once we have fulfilled the purpose, then it's no longer needed. Because once everybody has hearing technology, that 8 million disappears and we've all done our jobs. We just have to wait for the next generation to come along and so on. But if we keep on top of it, that's fine. Now, to do that, the goal is to make it faster, cheaper, and better. Making sense so far? And we already seen before that the ways to do this is to use commoditization, digitization, and what was the other one? Despecialization. Let's get to my words tangled then. Right. So that's where this idea of over-the-counter and self-fit hearing technology comes in. Because when we start thinking of it in a functional way like that there is an untreated need and it's too big for honestly, if we get all the audiologists, all the hearing care professionals together, we haven't got enough resources to fit those 8 million people. So, in America, they have an even bigger problem, and this is where this talk of over-the-counter devices has come from, because there, they don't have a national health service, so the technology is much more expensive, the adoption rate is much lower, for other reasons too, but that's one of the main reasons they believe. Okay, now, just follow the argument. This is what I was saying about the time limit and needing to get out of a mess, because it doesn't look too good at the moment, would you agree? Okay, just stay with me. Okay, to become faster and cheaper, the process is, what we have to do is we have to reduce variability. This is what happens in manufacturers. In manufacturing, you make sure that everything matches the same way. Some of you may have heard of Sigma 6 and things like that. We have to reduce the time that's involved in the process because time is money. We have to reduce the complexity of the problem and we have to make it simpler. We have to reduce the need for having experience involved. We don't want to have to go to the person who's been there sort of 10, 20 years in order to be able to solve a particular problem because that increases costs. And we also then have to reduce the need for having expertise involved. Somehow we have to systemize that. And finally, we have to reduce any risk involved. That's how you become faster and cheaper. Now, if you're doing that, you cannot be the opposite. So, if you want to, in a very short term, find a way to avoid becoming commoditized, you look for those people who have needs or wants, or has a need for more individualization, needs more time given to them, has more complex needs, requires more experience, requires more expertise, and where there's more uncertainty and more risk involved. So generally, those are two ends of the spectrum. So I want to ask you a few questions. Let's play the true or false game. So if I bring up this, would you say this is true or false? My clients are so pleased with their current hearing technology that they'll never need to upgrade again. True or false? False. Oh, good. We're on the same page. That would have been awkward. Right, okay, next one. None of my clients have problems with memory, dexterity, and learning new skills. True or false? Okay, next question. With the latest hearing technology, nobody now struggles in background noise or groups. True or false? All the people I see have straightforward audiograms and no complex problems. True or false? Okay. All the people I see already know exactly what they need, ... and are correct in their own analysis. Okay, some are. None of my clients have problems with wax, moisture, or faulty electronics. Oh, obviously, faulty electronics, no, that's not the case. We're obviously fitting not BIHIMA members. Okay, right. Okay, false. Okay, so, you see, there will always be a need for people who there will always be people out there who want to hear better than they currently do. In fact, as we heard earlier, younger people often overestimate how much difficulty they're having in background noise. So, you know, even if you've got the world's best hearing, there are situations where you want to hear better in. There will always be challenges that technology alone cannot fully help with. When we're talking about hearing in groups and background noise, it's not just the technology that's involved there, as we know. There's cognitive issues as well. There will always be people who will pay for personalized service or expertise. As the world becomes more commoditized and everything becomes more uniform, there will always be people who want luxury or want to know that they are different and set themselves apart from the hoi polloi. There will always be people for whom aging is getting the better of them. It's all right having fancy apps, but if somebody can't use them because the technology is just moving too fast, there will always be people without time, skill, or confidence and will want to outsource that. So when we come back to this, about this purpose to get hearing technology onto more people, it's really only covering the functional aspect of the problem. Because when we look at all of these things, these are really addressed by the experiential and the aspirational. And that's what I call the human factor. It's the things that only human beings can, at this moment in time and for the foreseeable future, do, no matter how artificial intelligence goes. So when we come back to our scale here, this seesaw, we see that on the left-hand side, we could summarize that if you want to become faster and cheaper, increase your uniformity and automation to such an extent that you could replace what you're doing or yourself with a machine or a non-expert. That's not a bad thing, by the way, because what it does is it gives you more time for the human factor. So make people feel like they matter as individuals and empower them to reach and fulfill their potential, that aspirational level, and then you avoid becoming a commodity yourself. In other words, see things in terms of whether it's functional, aspirational, or experiential. Now, here's another thing. We might sort of see these things as two separate boxes like are shown here, where you can either have one or the other. But actually, what we should be doing is remembering from the boarding card up to the air travel, up to the holiday vacation, is that there is a hierarchy. The functional serves the experiential and the aspirational. So we can use that to our advantage. So we now have enough information to answer, at least tentatively, the question, will hearing technology ever remove the need for the hearing care professional? Remember, in order to answer this question, we have to start by saying, well, what is the purpose? Know the purpose. What is your purpose? What is my purpose? What is the purpose of the profession? If it is that it is to address untreated hearing loss by getting hearing technology onto more people, that's a hearing aid dispenser. And that is what we have been called traditionally for decade after decade. It's it's actually our what do we call protected title if you're registered with the HCPC. Also, think about how we measure the success of a hearing aid dispenser. We measure them in terms of numbers of units, which suggests that we're thinking of this in terms of a resource to answer that particular purpose. The problem is that commoditization, digitization, and despecialization can do a better job of those things increasingly. So, because if we increase uniformity and automation to such an extent that you could replace yourself with a machine or a non-expert, then basically that starts to impact on the role of the hearing aid dispenser. In other words, they've served their purpose because something has come along that can serve that purpose better. But remember what we said earlier, that this is the functional aspect of the problem. And what we're forgetting here is the human factor. And the functional serves the experiential, serves the aspirational. So if we want to ensure that there is a hearing care professional in the future, we have to make sure that we somehow find a way to move past just the products and services, not get rid of them because they are essential to this whole process. We still will always need product. We could not be what we are without the fantastic technology we have. That is just simply the case. There wouldn't be a hearing aid dispenser or a hearing aid audiology without some way of solving that problem. Now in the future, it might be a smart pill. But that doesn't matter, because if we can find a purpose that goes above current technology as we see it, if we can see ourselves 100 years from now as a profession, look at that, what timeless need is there that we can be serving? So then, in terms of our individual businesses, our individual practices, the functional would cover the products and services, whereas the experiential, we could say, covers our practice and the client experience, the client journey. So what about the aspirational in terms of our own businesses and things? Well, that comes down to our mission and our philosophy and our branding. It's what do we stand for? What's the aspiration that we are helping people to achieve? What is the destination that we are helping them on that journey towards with the functional? So now, let's think about where our hearing aid dispenser, in inverted commas, fits. Where does this person belong? Well, if we think about the human factor, I would suggest that more and more we will start thinking of the hearing care professional in the experiential aspect. It's using the functional in order to get people to the aspirational. Now, we've just talked here about hearing care professional, but we can't talk about the hearing care professional without understanding the hearing care profession. So where do we start here? Well, the hearing care profession, which defines the professional, we have to start really with the destination. It's what does the profession stand for? What's the point of the hearing care profession? In other words, we have to find some reason why there's a reason for us, even if products and processes make automation and uniformity replace the need at certain aspects. So what is it? Well, if we come back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a starting point, and remember that hearing plays an integral role in all of these human needs, we've been touching on that all the way through the day in terms of the impact that hearing has on individuals and how they connect with one another. And that should be our starting point. Now, we haven't got time to go into this in detail. I have touched on it in other presentations, but there's a lot more we could talk about on that. But here's one way that we could define it. We could think of the role of the hearing care profession is to empower individuals and society, because the point of hearing is it allows us to connect. It's our 24/7 connection to the moment, to one another, and to the opportunities of life. So the role of the hearing care profession is to empower individuals and society to achieve and maintain their full potential through best possible hearing. And you'll see I've put inverted commas, best possible hearing, because we've never had a discussion about what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to make people feel better, we're trying to allow people to participate more, or we're trying to do more than that. And if we start with full potential and work backwards, then that will give us a clue. So then in terms of the experiential, the purpose of the profession then is to help that experience to happen, to get people from where they are to where they want to be, the journey. So that means that the profession together, as a unified voice, needs to foster or create a system of hearing care in which every member of society has the opportunity and means to appreciate and experience best possible hearing. And the word appreciate there means several things, but in particular, they need to understand what the point of best possible hearing is. We understand that teeth are important to us because of the dental profession. We understand that vision is important to us because of the eye care profession. The society is crying out for the voice of the hearing care profession, and it hasn't happened. It's getting there, but it hasn't yet happened. And then the functional, the purpose is to facilitate the evolution of products, processes, and services I can't read that far away. So the profession is better able to fulfill its timeless purpose. So when we start thinking of people's timeless human needs and the role that hearing plays, and we see hearing care as providing the means to help society be the best that it can be because the hearing is at its best, then we use the products and the services and the processes, whether it's conventional hearing technology, whether it's over-the-counters, whether it's self-fitting, it all becomes part of that umbrella to help us be the voice or the guardians of hearing to help people get to where they should be. So we use the functional, we then embrace commoditization, digitization, despecialization. We use it to our advantage. We see anything that's new there, we assess it and say, how can that better serve our purpose? Which is the purpose of society and the purpose of individuals, because we are representing hearing within individuals and society. And then in terms of the experiential, we say, how can we make sure that we are doing something that cannot be replaced by machines, cannot be replaced by non-experts? And then finally, what is the aspirational? We start thinking in terms of timeless human needs and how hearing serves that. So will hearing technology ever remove the need for the hearing care professional? Well, I return to what George taught us, that a profession that defines itself by a product or a process will always be under threat of obsolescence. But a profession that defines itself by a timeless purpose or need and then uses the evolution of products and services to better fulfill that purpose or need will stand the test of time. Kodak is no more. Well, they are, but they went bankrupt in 2012, certainly in terms of what they're doing with the photography. But photographers and cameras still exist. So will hearing technology ever remove the need for the hearing care profession? It really depends on what type of hearing care profession we choose to be. Thank you very much.